Hi, welcome to Ask GMBN Tech. You know the drill, you ask the questions, we give you the answers. Get involved in the comments, use the hashtag Ask GMBN Tech so we know which ones are questions and which ones are comments. First up this week is from Lester de Ross. How does one tell when parts like cassettes need to be replaced? Well, generally the life of cassette is actually dictated by the life of your chain. Now, it's a bit of a reverse thinking here to think about this. So generally, you should try and replace your chain before it's actually stretched. And the theory behind this is a chain, you suffer a thing called chain stretch. Now, the metal doesn't stretch. It can't physically happen, so it's a bit of a weird name. But what does happen is the pitch of the chain changes very slightly over time. And this happens because the chain, you've got the inner links, the outer links, got a pin that joins them, and then you've got a roller that rolls around. Now, that roller gets almost like worn from the inside, so it gets a little bit baggy. We're talking like fractions of a millimetre here, but when those fractions of a millimetre allow for a little bit of movement in the chain link and that's extended over the length of a chain, you get chain stretch. Now, what happens with chain stretch is those rollers stop sitting in that perfectly round groove that you have on a cassette in your sprockets or on your chainring at the front, and they start leaning on one of the two sides forward or back. As a result of that, it starts hooking the teeth, and then you're suddenly in the realm of a worn cassette or a worn sprocket on the front. So some people quite happily will run a chain until it's absolutely done, in which case your cassette will be as well. Other people can be a bit smarter if you want to preempt this, and if you can be bothered, by using a chain checker tool and replacing your chain before it's worn. And the theory is you can get at least two cassettes. Sometimes, at least two chains per cassette. Sometimes three if you're really on it. And that way your cassette will last much, much longer. But ultimately it will be down to where you ride, the conditions you ride in, the mud local to you, how you ride. You might be a single gear masher that just uses a single sprocket, in which case it's going to wear more than the other ones on a cassette. So it's kind of a little bit different for each rider out there, but hopefully that gives you some indication. There'll be some links in the description underneath to videos showing you how to use this chain checker tool. In my opinion, that is one of the top 10 tools every mountain biker should own. Just check your chain from time to time before it looks a bit baggy. Change it out, keep some links from that chain, recycle the rest of it, and those additional links can be used if you have a chain, I don't know, snap your chain and bend a link or whatever, you can graft one in from there and it will mate up quite nicely. Next up's from RMTB. Hey, I'm using a Fox transfer dropper post in a 30.9, but my frame is a 31.6. I used a shim with it. The problem is my dropper post doesn't go up on full travel or doesn't fully extend. I need to manually pull it with my hand to extend the dropper post. Is it because of the shim that adds tightness on it? The barrel adjuster is fine. Is it a short shim? Because you can obviously get like long section shims and quite short ones. If it's a short one, it's probably putting pressure directly on the bush that's in the seat post. So when you strip down a seat post, in fact, there's a video down there of me stripping one at home, you'll see on the inside, you've basically got the stanchion tube, you've got the outer tube, like a mini suspension fork, and you've got a bush, which is essentially the bearing to allow that smaller inner tube to slide in and out. If you're overly compressing the outer tube, it's possible to ruin the action of the post. Now, you can do this at home accidentally on a regular mountain bike just by overdoing it on the seat collar on your frame, depending on what design you have. So I would say it's probably to do with this shim on yours. If you have got a long shim, then there's a good chance you might just have over-tightened it. That's generally what would happen with something like that. So, process of elimination there, I think you need to try a few things. But a long shim and correctly torqued up will distribute the load a bit better. If your post is moving and it's at the correct torque, try using an assembly compound in there. You might need to use carbon gripper, something that's carbon safe. And if you're wondering what a carbon compound or a carbon gripper compound is, or an assembly compound, pretty much a grease with floating particles, and those particles help give more friction, essentially to stop things moving. Next up is from Paul Newton. My lad is using Maxxis tyres on his mountain bike, a DHR2 on the rear and a high roller on the front. Not having much experience with mountain bikes, I was wondering if there are any wear markers on the tyres and when I should replace the tyres with new ones. No, there's no wear markers on mountain bike tyres, and usage on them varies massively in what goes on. So really, it's going to be down to you to inspect the tyres. Now, if it's used, for example, on hard surfaces like tarmac, asphalt, concrete, stuff like that, the main central tread is obviously going to wear much faster than the shoulders. If you're using it loads off-road, there could be a good chance that some of those knobbles can start tearing. Perhaps if your son's quite aggressive at riding, for example, you can tear the shoulder knobbles clean off in some cases with softer tyres. You can also get lacerations and cuts on the casing itself. So periodically, I recommend after every ride, just spinning your wheel around, having a quick look at the tyres, making sure there's no obvious slashes in the casing. If there is, get yourself some vulcanizing solution from a traditional puncture repair kit and just fill those little slashes in. So A, you'll stop more debris going in there, and B, the theory is to stop the slashes growing, so your tyre will last longer. It's something that I'm pretty sure that not many people do, but pay a bit of attention to your tyres and they will generally last a bit longer. Check the sidewalls as well, because they're always prone to scuffing on rocks and things, and that's where slashes often start, and they can get worse really quickly. But there's no sort of dedicated timeline to how long they'll last. Of course, the compound of the tyres will come into play here as well. So if your son has a softer compound, like Max Grip, for example, they're going to wear out much faster than some of the other tyres out there with firmer compounds that will roll faster, but not necessarily have as much grip, but they will last you longer, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. Next up from 3M1L, or whatever. I'm looking to build some kind of free ride bike park bike. Can I use a 27.5-inch frame like the Common Cell Clash, but with a 26-inch rear wheel if I compensate the BB drop with a higher axle to crown fork? Yeah, you could do that, but to be honest, the Clash is a mega bike. My nephew's got one of those, and that thing sticks to the ground, wicked for jumping as it is. I'm not sure why you'd want to put a smaller rear wheel on there, anyway, because you're going to feel those braking bumps and all the stuff that you're going to hit in the bike park more with a 26-inch rear wheel. But yeah, you could. You'll slam the bottom bracket though, so even if you're saying compensating the drop, it would still be a bit lower at the back, even with that higher axle to crown fork there. Yeah, you could do it, but I think the bike is awesome as it is, so I probably wouldn't. If you want to have the bike feeling a bit slacker, you could go for like a 2.6 front tyre, something like that, and keep like a 2.4 on the rear. Don't know, up to you, experiment. I don't think it will be a bad thing, but I probably wouldn't do that myself. Next up's from Joel MTB. Hey Doddy, why is my rebound slower when it's cold outside, and how can I fix it? I've never noticed this, to be fair, and it's probably because we don't ride in conditions cold enough for the oil viscosity to change. And this is essentially what it's down to. So in extremely cold temperatures, the oil can feel slightly thicker, as it were, a bit more congealy, thicky, gloopy. And once it starts cycling through those shims and ports quite a lot, the oil heats up and the viscosity can get slightly thinner, in which case your rebound will work better. So you could perhaps keep your bike indoors, keep it warm. That would help when you go out, and then by the time you're using it, the oil will be slightly warmer. You could get an oil that copes with colder temperatures slightly better. Or you could just alter your fork settings or your shock settings when you go out. So I wouldn't change your sag because you're going to need that to be consistent, but you could back off on the compression and back off on the rebound 2 or 3 clicks. As long as you know where you are, remember to count those so you can go back to how your preferred setting is. And you'll know when the bike starts performing great, you can just add those clicks back on again. Any other tips from anyone who rides in cold temperatures that's had problems like this? I've never really noticed it being a problem here. Keen to know. I'm doing a little bit of research on the side because we do want to do some kind of cold weather trip at some point to find out stuff like this. So always keen to learn more. Next up's from Brandon Williams. Doddy, I just picked up a nuke-proof Scout frame. I'm looking to build it up as an aggressive, enduro-friendly hardtail. Chain reaction cycle specs had it as having a 130 fork travel. I was looking at putting a Lyric 150 on it. Would it be a good idea, or should I stick to 130? Well, the bike is designed for 130, but that's for a range of things. Keep the bottom bracket a good height, to keep the seat angle in relation there. But Blake ran a 170mm travel Lyric on his bike for the Meg Avalanche. I mean, I think it was 170. He might have dialed it to 160, but either way, bigger travel than what yours is. And he absolutely loved the way the bike rode. I think his body hated the way the bike rode, riding an event like that on a hardtail, but it worked great. And he has been known to swap back to it here and there. However, for all-round riding, 170 and even 160 is too much. So yeah, I would go for it. I think it'd be a good laugh. And if it is that bit too long, you could always take it down to 140mm travel and have a compromise. But I reckon you'd get away with that. That would be good fun. Next, from PLINOGRO Magic. Hey Doddy, I'm trying to get some more braking power on my YT Capra with code RSC brakes, and that's SRAM code brakes. I'm currently running them in the stock setup. Now wondering if I could run Magura's in 220 up front and in the back. Beside that, have you got any ideas to increase braking power? Well, you could just increase your braking rotor size on your existing brakes. SRAM make 220s now, so you could have 220 on the front and the 200 on the rear. That would give you loads of power. Sintered brake pads, loads of power on those things, or even their sort of their semi-organic, the power brake pads they make. Those things are super sharp. But that said, Magura's do offer something a little different. Now, I wouldn't have said, you know, without testing them side by side, they're actually more powerful as such, but they are definitely sharper, I found. So I rode a set of Magura's back to back with some SRAM brakes that were on my bike the other day at the bike park, and there wasn't really overall difference in the braking power. Like, the SRAMs are absolutely fine. In fact, mine were guides, they're not even codes. But the Magura's, the instant touch you've got on them, they are so sharp that it actually takes a bit of time to get used to them. Because they're that sharp, you're accidentally locking up wheels. So those with the bigger rotors must be unbelievably sharp. But like I said, I don't think that overall the power is that much different. I think it's more to do with the fact just those brakes, the initial leverage on them is so high. But the good thing about that, I guess, is you use less hand effort to get the braking going. So that might be a really good thing for you, might be what appeals. But to be honest, I would just say experiment with your brake pads and your rotor size before investing in a whole new brake system. You could always give them a fresh bleed as well. You'd be surprised what that does to set up brakes. It can make them feel really good. As always, there'll be some videos down there to help with that stuff. Next up from Alex, Doddy, when buying a new bike, do you consider it would be better to get a bike with top of the line geometry and mid-level components like Specialized, or one with top components but not so much of a progressive frame? Okay, well, I guess it depends on your intentions and your initial budget. So with regards to talking about high-end componentry on a bike, think of it a bit like a carrot and a donkey. Yeah, it's kind of there to lure you in. Yeah, almost a bit of a false sense. You know, the carrot's always going to be there in front of the donkey sort of thing. And the XT mech on that back of the bike that's actually got SLX on it is calling you because you're like, oh yeah, I can see the XT, I can't see the SLX stuff. And my mates can see the XT as well. Ignore that stuff. That is consumable components. So yes, they will work better and you will enjoy them, but they still wear out. So whatever's on the bike, you can, if you save up some money, buy better ones each time they work out. So I'd actually recommend looking at the most important things, which are the frame, the fork, and the shock. Everything else on the bike, treat them as consumables. Even the wheels, you will destroy them in time. And by the time you destroy them, you'll have been able to save up some money to upgrade them if that's what you want to do. Same with tires, they're going to wear out. Don't just go changing them straight away. Use them, make use of those things. So the frame to replace, obviously, it's an expensive item. Rear shock and fork, very expensive to replace. So if you can get a frame with good fork and good shock on there, the rest of it actually all kind of falls into line. I mean, it's a difficult thing, I appreciate, when you're trying to get the best value bike for your money, but that's the way I would be looking at it. Like, don't get drawn into new tech too much as well. Look at what is really good for you. Look for geometry when you talk about progressive. Look what is actually good for you and your needs. Don't be so quick to, you know, go and get the latest thing, because quite often the latest thing, we'll just say high pivot bikes for the moment, could be a bit more of a fad. Yeah, there's no doubt they're good in some situations, but they're almost certainly not going to be like the amazing thing all round that everyone might be thinking they are. Otherwise, that there would be a lot more of them. So I would get something that's a bit more general, but with geometry that really suits you, the travel that suits you. If you're buying a new bike, look for one that's got a good warranty program on there, perhaps a brand that has good after-sales service, that sort of stuff. They're the important things. Like I said, frame, fork, and shock. You know, the rest of it is cheaper for you to upgrade over time. You get those fundamentals right, and you'll be onto a winner. Oh, there we go. That's the end of this week's Ask. Quite a good selection of questions, actually. Any more, fire away in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one. Ta-ra.